Do you face the pressure of being the perfect parent? Did you find that being able to feed your baby with the milk from your own body felt like your first test of perfect parenthood? My guest today shares openly about the added pressure she felt to be, quote, good at breastfeeding since she became an IBCLC before she ever was a mom. Molly Peterson shares openly about the struggle in addition to dealing with the fears of having a C-section and how that would impact her milk supply, dealing with severe oversupply, and realizing that postpartum anxiety was making it hard for her to live her best life as a mom. So much was packed into a relatively short conversation. Enjoy. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
My name is Molly. I've been with my high school sweetheart for 12 years. We've been married for 4, and we have a little girl. Her name is Ella, and she is 18 months old. I always refer to her as a Sour Patch Kid because first she's sour, then she's sweet. She'll come up and smack you and then give you a big kiss, and it's okay. Thank you very much for that. So she's pretty great. My little bestie, I like to call her. And then when I'm not in my mama mode, I'm actually a lactation consultant. So that's been a pretty interesting journey for myself as a breastfeeding mom. Second, I was became a lactation consultant first, and then a mama. So that transition was a little interesting, that's for sure.
I don't think I've met very many lactation consultants who Were you a nurse first?
No. So
Okay.
I got started in a weird way. My background, I was in college studying speech pathology, and I really liked it, but I worked at a durable medical equipment facility, like a pharmacy, while I was in school, and the Affordable Care Act happened, and they're like, we need somebody to get pumps for moms. And I was like, I could do that. That can't be that hard, right? I learned very quickly I needed more information other than, here you go, good luck. So I took Jan Barger's week-long lactation specialist class, and I was like, this is it. This is exactly what I need to be doing. What am I thinking? So I graduated school with a bachelor's degree in speech pathology, and then I figured out all the requirements to become a lactation consultant. I found a mentor. It's been a crazy journey, but it also kind of set, I think internally, I was like, I want to be able to breastfeed as a mom. This would be a really great thing for me personally and professionally. So it worked out really well. I'm really happy to have both hats to be able to wear.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that story. And I love that you realized, oh my gosh, this is way more complicated than just giving them the pump, because that's just such a big complaint from so many people, is that they don't know. And there is so much that goes into milk supply and pumping. And so many distributors don't offer that extra help. Now, there are a lot of companies that are now trying to offer
figuring it out,
more
right?
Support, right?
For sure.
Yeah, but that's pretty amazing. That's how you dove in. And it's interesting that you have that speech background too, because there's so much that goes into oral function.
Yes. Just a very unique perspective. And I just finished a master class for oral rehabilitation, which changed things even more for me. So that's been a really fun journey. But yeah, I feel like myself and my other teammates at my practice, we all look at things very differently. We have one who's a hospital-based lactation consultant who retired and wanted to be able to just still be in lactation land. We have one who is a postpartum doula first, and then me. So we all just have this very different view of the dyad. So it makes very interesting for people to say, hey, I saw someone, but I really think you should see so, and give me your feedback of what I did and how we could help them differently. And it just, I feel really well-rounded, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so I'm so interested to know about your personal and professional life, but we're really here to talk about your personal breastfeeding experiences. So what was your exposure to breastfeeding before you got excited about lactation work and before you were starting your family?
Sure. So my mom breastfed, she attempted to breastfeed me for 6 weeks and it didn't work, so she stopped. My brother, he was failure to thrive. He was in a hospital with a feeding tube. I don't remember, I was only like two. And then siblings 3 and 4, she did breastfeed past a year. So I don't necessarily remember it, but I also don't remember a lot of bottles or anything like that. And then other like extended family members, I had cousins who exclusively breastfed all three of her kids, other cousins who exclusively formula fed her kids. So I feel like I had this interesting balance growing up at family gatherings, seeing different feeding methods, if you will. But in the back of my head, I was like, oh, you have boobs and that's what you do to feed your baby. So I had always known, for me personally, breastfeeding was going to be, it wasn't a question. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's how I'll feed the baby. And I have an aunt who's like a second mom, and she was a childbirth educator and a Lamaze coach. And you just talk to her about everything birth and baby, and breastfeeding would come up, and that is what it was. And it was just really nice to have that idea, that seed planted early on.
Yeah. And had you seen breastfeeding up close and personal with peers as you became a young
Yeah.
adult?
Not really. I was probably one of the first of like my friends to get pregnant and have a baby. So not really. We would be at the park or whatever and you'd see a breastfeeding mom. And in the back of my head, I was like, oh, you can do that in public? That's allowed? Before I got into what I do. And no, I had no like friends who had breastfed, none of that. Right after college is when I went down my own journey to become a lactation consultant. So I personally was kind of like in it professionally, but I didn't have a lot of exposure personally with anybody I was close to.
Yeah. Okay. So your path then was very different because I usually ask people, what did you do to prepare once you became pregnant? But you had already become an IBCLC by the
Yeah.
time you were pregnant. So you had a lot of knowledge and you had at that time already helped a lot of people in their own breastfeeding journeys. So I guess I would like to know then, what was it like for you initially? And then we can talk about how your expectations differed from your reality then when
Yeah.
it was
I would,
finally your
yeah.
turn.
I was scared to breastfeed. I will be honest because I felt all of this pressure. Molly, the
Mm.
lactation consultant, has to be able to make this work. And I would joke with my husband, I know how to help people looking this way. I don't know how to do it from looking down at myself. And so I felt just a lot of anxiety and pressure behind the whole thing. And so preparing for breastfeeding, in my brain, I had all of the knowledge, and we were planning for an all natural birth at the birth center that I work at, and our daughter ended up being breech. And so we did all of the
Mm.
things possible to get her to flip, because in my brain, again, having a natural delivery and breastfeeding, it just was what I had planned for. Like there wasn't any other options, at least preliminarily. And so when she was breech, we were like, okay, we'll just get her to flip and it's fine. And we'll do all the things we have to do. And so we did chiropractor appointments. We did spinning babies. We did acupuncture. I would go, it was the winter time. And so I went to a gym that had a pool, and all these like super fit dudes are like swimming down the lanes. And here I am, like this pregnant Shamu, like doing handstands and like
Mm.
floating and like just anything I could do to get her to flip. It didn't work. So we ended up trying a ECV, or a version where they tried to like manually flip her from the outside, and that was a fail. So we had to very much shift our plan to a C-section. That was what we decided. And that just scared the crap out of me even more, because I was like, I know if you have a C-section, all of these things with breastfeeding can happen. And so I was scared. I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect with a C-section and how much pain I was going to be in, and what that was going to do to my milk coming in and all of that kind of stuff. And one thing that I learned that I didn't know professionally was, when you have a C-section, they numb you from like your shoulders to your toes. And in the hospital, I was like, I got this. This is great. After she was born, breastfeeding doesn't hurt. This is amazing. My nipples were numb. So I have all of these families that I see, and they're like, it was really easy in the hospital. And then after a couple of days, like it started to hurt. And I don't know why. But yeah, that's because our freaking nipples were numb. And I like just
Mm.
didn't connect the dots there. So that was just an interesting feeling for me. And because she was breech, she had these like little weird baby breech hips. So we had to be very careful with the positioning of her. She didn't end up having hip dysplasia or needing like a harness or anything, which was great. But we were worried. So we were trying to position her very carefully and trying to like deal with a C-section incision. It was a whole nother like element to it. So we got off, I think, a little bit rocky, but found our way. And then after about a few weeks, I decided to meet with a lactation consultant because I just needed somebody to tell me what I already knew, but I needed somebody else to tell it to me. My husband would say things like, "What do you mean? What would you just tell a client? What would you say to them?" And I would say, "I would tell them to do this, but I don't know if that's the case because of her and and I suffered with a lot of postpartum anxiety, so I think that was contributing. So I went and I saw my mentor and I was like, please just tell me that I'm doing this right and what I need to be doing. And I had enough milk to feed the neighborhood. So oversupply was my biggest challenge early on. I always joke that the lactation consultant needed a lactation consultant. Everybody needs support and it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, a midwife doesn't deliver their own baby. Neither
Right.
does an OBGYN.
Good point.
These don't prescribe meds to themselves.
Yes, very
They
true.
don't diagnose themselves. Pediatricians don't see their own kids.
True, yeah.
They find other pediatricians that they trust
Yep.
to diagnose and treat their children as their primary care providers. We need other people to support us because it's different when we are the
Yes.
person needing support.
It's so different. I could not wear my mom hat and my lactation hat at the same time. Like,
no, and you
it
shouldn't be
didn't
expected
work.
to. Right.
Yeah, and I think that was a lot on me. Like, I felt the pressure to know what to do, and my husband would say to me, "Is that normal? Should she be doing that? Why is she doing that?" And I'm like, I don't know. Like, it was so anxiety inducing because I felt like I needed to be able to have all of the answers about normal baby behavior, but it was hard for me to be able to put the two pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have that added pressure of being the expert
Yeah, it
made it
definitely
more
changed.
difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
hard, but we found our rhythm and we're still breastfeeding at 18 months, which is awesome. She did have a issue with dairy, so that was just like one little kink. And I joke with parents all the time. We live in Wisconsin. Cheese is life. Like, it's probably not a dairy allergy. Like, if they don't have these symptoms, let's see what else is going on. Usually it's air intake or gas or something. She had the classic eczema, mucus in her stool, blood in her stool. Like, it was very clearly a dairy allergy. And once I cut it out, like, all was well. So we're now slowly starting to be able to introduce dairy back into her diet, which is really exciting because that means I get to have dairy in my diet. So we got ice cream last night and that was really special. But I went and I saw a dietitian. Like, I needed somebody to tell me, like, this is what you can eat to help meet your nutritional needs as a breastfeeding parent who has a child with a dairy intolerance. And like you said, we all need that support. And I just needed somebody to constantly tell me, like, yes, that's right, or no, why don't you do this, and help me make those informed decisions for myself.
Yes, yes. And do you have a list of providers that you know are people that are going to support breastfeeding for yourself and for your clients as well? Like, you
Yeah,
know that there's a nutritionist that you knew was going to support your breastfeeding goals that you could go to?
yeah, absolutely. We're really fortunate here in Milwaukee area that there's a lot of amazing providers, whether it's chiropractor, craniosacral therapist, dietitian. I know of a dietitian lactation consultant, so she's both, and so she does virtual. She lives in Illinois, so just across the border. But so I was able to call her up and schedule an appointment and just get her 2 cents because her having the lactation consultant mindset and also the dietitian mindset, like, she could kind of merge the two, which was really helpful.
Yeah. Okay, so you had this unexpected C-section. It was expected once you realized that baby wasn't flipping,
Yeah.
and you were
Yeah.
worried about the impact that would have on breastfeeding. You're already worried about being the lactation consultant who might not be able to breastfeed. So you have this one anxiety, and then you have another anxiety of, okay, now I have to have a C-section, and you already knew the impacts that could have on breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned having nipples numbed during breastfeeding. And we know that when you can't feel your nipples during breastfeeding, that actually, it's the nipple stimulation which releases prolactin
Yep.
into the bloodstream, which is
Yep.
what creates the milk. And so that can be what delays the full milk coming in, the full milk supply coming in when you have a C-section. Did you notice a delay in your milk supply, in your mature milk going into that?
I think that because I was so aware of the situation, I made sure that she was at the breast all of the time to try and get as much stimulation as I could to prevent any sort of delay. We had alarms that would go off in the middle of the night. Nobody was sleeping through anything. I think I was just very hyper aware of that concern and preventing it. So my milk came in about day 3, which for a first time mom with a C-section, I was like, okay, this is not too terrible. We had our C-section at the hospital and then were able to discharge back to the birth center that we were planning on delivering at for 2 nights. They were really much queen size bed, much more comfortable environment than a hospital. Nobody like coming and bothering you all of the time. So I think that kind of helped reduce my stress level a little bit more to be able to kind of focus on her and making sure breastfeeding was going well. But after my nipples, the numbness wore off, they were sensitive. Like, I think that, there's this conception out there that it's either not going to hurt at all or it's going to be this terrible pain. And it doesn't have to be either one of those. Mine were just a little bit tender. Nobody had sucked on my nipples for 40 minutes at a time every 3 hours. Having that little bit of tenderness, it also helped me realize, okay, like I get what parents are saying. Like it doesn't necessarily hurt, but it doesn't feel great. My husband just ran to my office and got me some nipple cream and all was well after that. But it was just an interesting sensation that I don't think anybody can prepare themselves for. Like I said, it wasn't like it was painful, but just different. And I had never breastfed before. I had never pumped before. So I had talked about it, but never had been able to do it myself. So I feel like now I can recognize like a little bit closer what might be more normal versus abnormal when working with a client, which is always really helpful.
Yeah. And so then you were able to transfer to the birthing center. I'm so glad that you brought that up, that you weren't being interrupted or woken up, because we know that stress can have such an impact on milk supply and on how well breastfeeding initiates. And hospital environments can sometimes really impact that. And you're being told on the one hand, get some rest. And then on the other hand, you're being interrupted by 10 different people 10 different times.
Seriously. And for me, with a C-section, you have to have a catheter. So then eventually they took the catheter out. But like I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to pee by myself with how you're all numbed up still for a good 24 hours. And every 30 minutes they were coming in. Have you peed yet? Have you peed yet? Have you peed yet? I'm like, give me a minute. Like I'm trying to get the baby latched and like trying to pee and trying to sleep. Like it was impossible. Luckily it all worked out, but transitioning back to the birth center, that car ride to get there was brutal. But once we got there, I like didn't leave the queen size bed for 2 days, and there's a full kitchen so my husband could go make meals, and they have the midwives there that I know and I trust. They were my providers and my friends, so it was nice to just see the familiar faces who were able to support me the way I needed to be supported. And that was, I will call you if I have a question or if I need something or if something doesn't feel right. But otherwise, they just let me be to do my own thing. They would check in as needed, but it was very much like, let Molly be. And it just was really helpful for my healing journey, I think.
Did you feel a sense of needing to perform as an IBCLC?
Yeah, for sure. Like I needed to be able to make it work. They'd come in and say, "How's feeding going?" And I would, in my head, say, "You have to say it's going great, even if your nipples hurt. Like it's going great." And I was like, "It's going great," but Jake had to grab me some nipple cream, or anybody would come in, I'd be like, "Look, I can latch her so great." And that pressure that I think I put on myself, but my friends and my colleagues also, they came in and it wasn't the questions that I think most first time moms get asked. How many times is baby feeding? Have they pooped? Have they peed? There wasn't a lot of that because I think it was, oh, Molly knows what she's doing. So I think my husband at one point was like, can you just make sure that she's like just look at the latch? And I was like, oh no, it's fine. And luckily my friend and midwife, she was like, yeah, Molly, let me just look really quick. Like I think a light bulb went off that was like, I should probably make sure that she's doing okay, even though she said she's doing okay. So I'm
Good
glad
for
that
him.
he was well prepared, let me tell you. It was good.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's good because you had mentioned that he was like asking you questions like, "Don't you know this?" But he had enough of a recognition to say, "Wait a minute,
Yes.
somebody else should just put their eyes on this."
Yes, for sure. It was we took a really like extensive 12-week long birthing class, so I think that helped him a little bit. And then we had talked, especially with the C-section, if I go down and I'm not waking up or like some complication happens, we talked about him having to be the one to do skin to skin immediately, and him being the one to pump me, ask for this pump, I need this size flanges, make sure somebody is pumping me every couple hours, make sure baby is getting my colostrum or donor milk. Like we had this like very intense plan in place. And looking back, I think I was a little bit too intense with my planning, but so many things were outside of my control. It was the one thing I could control. So I held on to that really tightly.
Yeah, I was a CLC already by the time I had my second.
Nice.
And had already been practicing and was very well informed. But I still hired an IBCLC to come out. Nothing was going that badly, but I had such a hard time with my first that I just needed somebody. And I had her come out. I think my insurance covered fully 6 visits.
I can't actually remember how many visits my insurance company covered, although that is another rant. Why are insurance companies determining the number of visits they will pay for? Let's allow patients and providers to work together to determine the appropriate number of lactation visits to make sure they are able to feed their babies with calm and ease. I do happen to know that my second IBCLC came for 3 visits. And I know this because she mentioned it when she shared her baby feeding stories on episode 67 of the Milk Making Minutes. I'll have that linked in the show notes, so be sure to check out her story.
You have these experiences and it sets you up, I think, for fear or worry, and you having that knowledge is great, but having, like you said, somebody else come peek is probably a brilliant idea.
Yeah. Did you collect colostrum at the end of your pregnancy?
I did right after she was born. I started expressing a little bit of colostrum and having it again with the C-section. Like I just didn't know. I probably, looking back, could have harvested some colostrum during my pregnancy, but I think I was still like, it had this feeling like, oh, maybe it'll all work out and I won't have to have this C-section. And if I do prepare too much, maybe it won't work the way I want it to. So I didn't do it during my pregnancy, but I was hand expressing and giving her little bits of that. Again, I really wanted to make sure my milk came in. So I was doing all of the things that I could think of without pumping to make sure that I didn't have any milk supply troubles. And I think ultimately it worked, but it also led to an oversupply, which, is another beast to deal with.
At what point did you realize that you had an oversupply?
Yeah, it was probably maybe 2 weeks. So we had went to her like 4-day pediatrician appointment, and she hadn't lost any weight from birth, which I was like, all right, that's great. And then we went back at 2 weeks, and she had gained double what we would have expected her to gain. And I was like, oh, and I could feel like the fullness all the time, but I was in the like 4th trimester, and I was like, I'm just gonna snuggle on the couch, and if she wants to feed all day long, I don't care. So probably like right after that 2-week appointment, my husband and I were like, let's go for a walk or do something. And we were gone a couple hours, and she had fed on one side, but she had her in the baby carrier, and we were walking, and it was really lovely. And then by the time we got home, my other breast was gonna explode. I was so uncomfortable. So I tried to feed her, and she fed, but not nearly enough, and was coughing and having all of these gagging and choking. And so then finally I busted out the haka, and I was like, I just have to relieve some pressure, and would use that as a tool. But I think now looking back, I wish I would have just like hand expressed a little bit and not gone the route of the haka, because I think that definitely contributed to my oversupply, which again, couldn't wear my lactation hat and my mom hat at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the first time you used the haka at that 2-week mark, and you had only been hand expressing and breastfeeding until that.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, there really wasn't anything besides just the breastfeeding that was contributing to the oversupply.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think just I would she would make a peep, and I was like, oh, okay, here, let's just put you to the
Ah.
breast, the thing. And I think once I started incorporating she would never be able to drain both sides effectively. She would feed on one and would tap out, but the other side was just leaking everywhere and I was going to explode. So then I would use the haka for a few minutes to try to take the edge off. And I think I probably overused it at that point, and I would probably take off more than I needed. And looking back, it was fun to look at what I can put in the freezer, and like I would draw little hearts on the bags, and I was like proud of myself for making that milk. But I think it probably also fed that oversupply for a while. So we ended up block feeding for 2 weeks, like 2 solid weeks of block feeding, which is a long time to block feed. And we got the supply at a manageable place. And so that was, once we figured that out, that was good.
Yeah. Describe block feeding.
Yeah, so I would feed her on one breast, 2 feedings in a row to try to help reduce supply. So the other side would, again, feel like it was going to explode. So I would have to either hand express or use the haka to take the edge off. And then 2 feedings later, I would feed her on the other side 2 times in a row. I was very fortunate to have more milk than I needed, and I ended up donating some, but it was hard because you felt no matter what, you had to either obviously feed the baby, but then also have something like to be able to collect some milk or go to the bathroom and squirt some in the sink if we were at a place that I didn't have my haka, or something to store the milk in. There was a lot of like pressure on my boobs a lot of the time, which never feels good.
Yeah. Were you constantly afraid of leaking through your shirts or leaking
Oh,
through
I
your
was
clothing?
leaking constantly. Yeah, I could go through breast pad after breast pad, and my husband would look at me and be like, honey, you got to change your pad. Okay, sorry, I'm just gonna grab another one. I'm constantly like wet and sticky. My daughter's constantly wet and sticky. It's just whole to do for sure.
Yeah. Did you ever experience any yeast infections or thrush or anything as a result of being
No,
sticky? Oh, good.
no, luckily, I think I was, again, very fortunate. My husband had 6 weeks off for his paternity leave. Working for myself, I didn't go back until 5 months. And again, super part time. If I was wet and sticky, I would just like immediately deal with it and wipe things down and change the pad. And luckily, I didn't have any sort of thrush or yeast at all. I did have one plugged duct in my lactation journey so far, knock on wood. That sucked, man. Like, you talk about them, but they are not fun. I think I took a video of frozen bag of peas like shoved in my bra, walking around trying to reduce the inflammation as much as I could, and dangle feed and do all of the things. And finally, we worked it out. But yeah, everybody says pug ducts are painful, but you don't know it until you go through it yourself.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned that baby would be fussy at the breast. You mentioned being leaky all the time, constantly full on the one side. You mentioned doing the block feeds for 2 weeks to reduce the supply. Was there anything else that you were seeing in baby that was letting you know that you had oversupply?
Yeah, she was a happy spitter. Luckily, it didn't contribute to GERD or anything. You'd lay her down and it would like projectile vomit just come back up. She was pretty gassy. Her latch was really good. That was helpful to prevent a lot of that. When you come off and you go, and you're coughing and you're choking, like she's just taking in air when that would happen. And she would be pretty gassy. And she would have occasions where even after we got rid of the dairy, she would still have mucus in her stool. And I think she was just like getting some lactose overload. Luckily, she never had any like super green poops or anything like that. You'd see this like mucus, and you can tell like you only were on for 3 minutes and I'm still super full. Like I know, that you got a lot of lactose, that. And she did have, I think the eczema was contributing from the dairy allergy. That was the other main thing that she would kind of experience too.
Okay. Yeah. So you started that block feeding. How old was baby when you started block feeding?
Yeah, Ella I waited until 6 weeks. I wanted to see if my supply would eat on its own or if I was going to have to take any steps myself. So we waited until 6 weeks and then started incorporating the block feeding. She was only ever feeding on one side at a time anyway. I never pushed the other side because she would come off just totally passed out and milk drunk. And then at around 6 weeks is when we started the block feeding.
If you are listening to this and thinking about your own baby feeding experiences and wondering if your baby's symptoms of gassiness, colic, fussiness, and more could be a result of oversupply, I would love to be the person who helps you figure that out. Knowing exactly what is contributing to your milk making frustrations can sometimes take some good old-fashioned detective work, and I am here for the challenge. If you have brought your concerns up with a pediatrician or other provider and felt dismissed, be sure to find me at www.quabbinbirthservices.com. In many cases, I can bill your insurance. If you're just looking for another resource to learn more about how oversupply can impact a baby, go ahead and check out episode 42 called Could My Baby's Fussiness Be from Oversupply? I'll have it linked in the show notes.
Yeah, so you mentioned too that you dealt with postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression. How would you classify it for
I
yourself?
think it was more postpartum anxiety for sure. I was we had to buy a baby monitor, so like when she was napping I could see her if I wasn't doing contact naps. Otherwise I would go check on her every minute, and my husband was like, you gotta stop. So then we got the baby monitor, and I would just like zoom in every minute to make sure she was breathing, and panic if I felt like she like was taking too long, and he was like, it's buffering, just give it a minute. We co-slept because it's easy for breastfeeding, but also I felt like if she was even away from me, even in a little bassinet, it was too far. So she slept on my chest for 4 months because like I needed to be able to feel her breathing. And I've got some family history myself with issues with my mom and things. So I felt like this inherent need to like be the perfect mom all of the time. So again, just putting a lot of pressure on myself. And finally, I think Ella was 5 or 6 months old, and I was like, I gotta talk to somebody. Like, this is overwhelming me. I felt like I couldn't drive because I would have these visions of somebody hitting the car or us taking a walk. I was afraid a car was gonna come up and hit the stroller or us in baby wearing. I talked to a care provider, and I started to just go to therapy, which I'm still doing. It's been really helpful for my mental health journey. And after kind of doing all of the things in therapy that I tried, we ultimately decided that going on a low dose anti-anxiety medication might be a good fit for me. So we started that around 6 or 7 months postpartum, and it's been really helpful. I don't zoom in on the baby monitor anymore and check her breathing, and I feel safe to drive, and I feel safe to do, normal things. I wish I probably would have started on it sooner than I did, but again, in my brain, I needed to be able to try other things first and maybe do the therapy and kind of work through some of it. And I still do that, but having the anti-anxiety medication definitely helps me feel like a regular person again, which is lovely.
Yeah, so important. And we get so little support as new parents. Like humans did not evolve to care for babies with two parents and their children. That's not how we took care of families historically.
So true.
Yeah. So the fact that's how we do it now, of course, so many of us are so anxious about caring for our children because it's just constant, nonstop. We're the ones making the decisions all the time and trying to keep them safe.
It was nice. My husband at the time worked for a school district. He was in their IT department. So I would call him constantly. What are you doing? How's your day? I just want just saying hi, and we're just here. And it was just this feeling of I'm alone, and that's scary. And Ella, when she was, even while I was pregnant, I would talk to her, hey, we're going to go to Target, and then we're going to go do this. So I felt like I was constantly like narrating my day, and we're going to go get dressed. And that helped me feel not quite as alone. But again, I'm talking to myself. Like, my infant daughter couldn't talk back to me. And so he would come home and I'd be like, tell me everything about your day. And I just want that like adult interaction, which was really nice.
Yeah. So then you said you went back to work when she was about 5 months old, part-time?
Yeah, I work at the birth center 2 days a week. So Sundays, and so my husband's kind of home hanging out with her. And then on Friday mornings, my friend watches her. So that's been really nice to have that time to do what I love but not be so overwhelmed with trying to balance the work life. So I feel I'm very fortunate there. I also work for the United States Lactation Consultant Association as their conference coordinator. Our conference is end of this month. So once I'm done with this conference, I'm kind of stepping back and focusing on my own practice and family. And we're thinking about growing our family again. So that'll be exciting. So yeah, lots of hats I think I try to wear, and not well all of the time, but you fake it till you make it, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so did you pump to provide milk when you went back to work, or?
No, so my husband was I started really slow and would only go in on Sundays when he was home, and I would do just like 1 or 2 consults. So I would feed her right before I left, and then I would feed her right when I got home. And the other times he would bring her so I could feed her. She tried bottles, like it worked, like it was fine. But I think the postpartum anxiety, like I felt like I had to be the one to feed her. So he would just bring her, or I would come home and feed her. I hated a few times I did pump. I hated it. Like I made sure my flanges fit correctly and all of that, but the sensation just wasn't for me. So we figured out a way that I didn't have to pump. And then as she got older and I started incorporating that second day of the week, she's eating solid foods and we spaced things out a little bit more. So I didn't have to worry about making sure I was pumping frequently or not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good for people to hear that they can, if they have that flexibility, there are ways to work around
For sure.
not having to pump if they don't want to. Now, not everybody has that flexibility.
Absolutely.
And we totally hear you and empathize if that is not your situation.
Yep.
But
Sure.
there are ways to make it work if you don't want to have to pump. And also, like I always tell people, it's not all or nothing.
Yes.
So any amount of breast milk that you want to provide for your baby is amazing. If you are listening and you want to provide breast milk for your baby while you are with your baby, but cannot or do not want to provide breast milk for when you are away from your baby, that is fine. And your body will adapt to that most of the time.
I completely agree with you there.
Yeah, it's not an all or nothing sum game. And
pressure off yourself. Give yourself some grace, especially if you're going back to work. That's a hard transition, not just for you, but for baby, and the timing and getting out the door and making sure you have your pump parts. And if you're stressed about it, it's understandable. It's a big change.
Is there anything that you want to share with listeners about what is the best advice that you received, especially in the transition from professional to parent, that you have taken with you in this journey that you think is valuable?
Yeah, I think the one thing that my aunt said to me, again, she's like a second mom, and I think I just said it, was give yourself some grace. That was my biggest thing. Like, you have never been a parent before. You have never breastfed before. You have never taken care of a human being before and tried to keep somebody else alive while you're also healing from a major surgery. And so just giving myself the permission to say, I don't have to do it all. I don't have to know how to do it all. It's okay. If she's in her little bouncy chair fussy while I take a shower, I needed to be able to just get that permission to myself. And I think that was really helpful. And I think too, knowing that there's a learning curve. You've never breastfed your baby before. They have never breastfed. Or even if you've breastfed 10 children, this baby has never done it before. And understanding that there may not only be a learning curve for yourself, but learning curve for the baby. And that is okay. And getting help when you need it. If things aren't working, just get help sooner rather than later.
Yes, I love that. Okay, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on like social media, Facebook and Instagram. It's at Peterson Lactation Services. If you want to check out my website, it's petersonlactationservices.com. I love Instagram. I love just being able to like share information and connect with other people. And if you're in the Milwaukee area, come to our free breastfeeding resource group or feeding resource group. Just come hang out with some moms and sit together and talk about this new season of life. It's really fun. So yeah, come find me. That'd be awesome.
Awesome. How frequently do you do those?
They're twice a month.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're really fun. They're on Tuesdays from 10 to 11.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll link your resources in the show notes. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is so fun. I really appreciate it.
It has been a joy to follow Molly on Instagram, so I hope you will too. All of her information is linked in the show notes, so it will be easy to find her. If you know someone who is struggling with oversupply or postpartum anxiety, or even worried about an upcoming C-section, please share this episode with them. And then tell me about your experiences with any of these topics in the Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. These are the barriers we are talking about in that group, so we can learn to overcome them. Hey, Jolie.
What?
Do you know what a lactation consultant is?
Yes.
Do you know anybody who is a lactation consultant?
You are.
I'm a lactation consultant. So what do you think a lactation consultant does for people?
Help people take care of their baby.
Yeah. And help them with milk when they're making milk or trying to feed their babies. Thanks.